Hey everyone, how's it going? This week in our MOJO series, we are talking about this guy named Abram. You might recognize him by the name of Abraham, but you might not know that his name was originally Abram. And Abram, he was just this regular guy that God called to do incredible things. God promised him that he would make him a great nation. And he went so far as to make this covenant with Abram. If you remember, we learned about covenants last week. He made this covenant or this promise with Abram, which solidified his call to be the father of so many great nations, and then as a result of this, changed his name from Abram to Abraham. And the name Abraham, it actually means the father of many nations. And so this covenant is made between Abraham and God, and Abraham is faithful to God. He's faithful in action. He does what God asks him to do. He's even faithful, patiently faithful in hard times. For instance, Sarah and Abraham, they reach this point where they know that in order for Abraham to be the father of many nations and generations, they'd first have to have a son, so that he could have a son and he could have a son, but they didn't have any children, and they were getting to a point, they were too old to have kids. I mean, they were pushing 100. People that old, they don't have kids. But God tells them, he says, I'm going to give you a son. And Sarah, it's funny, we can read this in Scripture. Sarah actually laughs at God. She gives him a, oh Lord, you old kook. I'm like a jillion years old. There's no way I can have a kid. But then, boom, God provided a son. And they named him Isaac. God actually wanted them to name him Isaac, which means he who laughs. Which is just a good sense of humor by God. It's like, Sarah, you laugh in my face. Name your kid Sir Laughs a Lot. And that's just good stuff, God. So they have this kid, they have their son Isaac, and we can see that he grows up into this awesome young man with some pretty sweet outdoors and bow skills. And actually that's where we're going to pick up the story. So why don't you go ahead and pause the video and read Genesis 22. What we read in the story in Genesis 22, it's heavy stuff. I mean, it's really hard, I think, to put ourselves in Abraham or Isaac's shoes and really wrap our head around what's going on. But before we dig into this story, I just kind of want to start off by saying it's really tough to understand the why. I think it's hard to look at this at its face value and just our gut reaction is to ask God, like, why? Why would you do this? Why is this happening? But really what I want to focus on tonight is the what. So just what we see in front of us and what God is doing through this situation. Because what we see is we see Abraham and Isaac walking up this mountain and we see what's coming ahead, and we don't know why it's happening and we don't exactly know what's going to happen yet. But what we do know is that they're acting in faith. I mean, it's actually pretty incredible. There has to be this moment towards the top where there's no more beating around the bush, where they Abraham kind of starts having to answer some questions for Isaac. I mean, we read in verses 6 and 7, there's a point where Isaac just says, where's the lamb for the sacrifice? And that's probably got to be a really difficult conversation for Abraham to have with his son. But what we see next, I think, is it's incredible. It's impossible for me to wrap my head around this faith that we see from Isaac too, because what he does is he lays down on the wood. I mean, that is an incredible faith, and clearly there's something going on here. I mean, they had faith that God would provide, that God was going to show up in this moment. And it's incredible for me to think about the faith that it took for Isaac to actually lay down there, because he didn't have to. I mean, no one was forcing him. Abraham didn't force him down. He laid down. And when you think about it, I mean, Abraham, he's like 100 years old, and Isaac, he's probably right around 19, 20 years old. If Isaac really wanted to, I don't think it would have taken much for him to square up to Dad and take him out before he fell over. But that's not how the story goes. We see Isaac has this incredible faith and trust that God would provide, and he lays down. I I mean, it's just impossible for me to wrap my head around this kind of faith, this just incredible level of faith that they had, but they knew that God would show up and provide, and he did. And then for years we see how God honors his covenant with Abraham, and generations are blessed through Isaac and through his son Jacob and through his son Joseph, and just so on and so on and so on. We read how God honors this covenant and just showers blessings on these nations. And it's just cool to see how God showed up, and not only in that moment, but for generations to come. We see how Abraham's faith, it set off this chain reaction that changed the course of history, and it wouldn't have happened if he didn't take that first step and walk up the mountain. But he trusted in God. And that just makes me think of my own life and how God has blessed me. I think a lot of you know that the reason that I'm here at Revision right now is because I raised support for my salary. So I had to go and talk to people and ask people that either I knew or I didn't know that well to support me financially so that I could do youth and missions work here at Revision. And it's just this step of faith that I took out. I knew that God wanted me to be here, so I stepped out in faith and knew that he would provide for me. And that's no pat on the back to me. It's no, good job, Jeff, you're awesome at raising money. No, this is clearly something that I could not do on my own, but I knew that God would provide so that I could be here. It's funny, I was just talking to Mike the other day. I asked him, when I first told you I wanted to fundraise, how much did you think? Basically, I said, how did you believe in me? Did you think I could do it? And he said, I thought you could maybe you could get half. And I kind of pushed him a little further. He said, yeah, actually, I think half would have been a big stretch. I'm like, oh, thanks, Mike. But I think it's just further proof that clearly this is something that I could not do on my own because it was hard. But God provided. He showed up when I stepped out in faith and provided what I needed to be here. And it's something I learned during that time is that there is this direct correlation between stepping out in faith and God moving. You see, faith led by courage yields blessings from God that changes our lives and it changes the lives of those around us. But to be completely honest, faith isn't always as easy as we'd like it to be. I mean, sometimes it's hard to take that first step. And it's hard to know the why of a certain situation. We don't always know why God does things or why he allows things to happen, but if we respond in obedience and we step out in faith, God provides and he creates this chain reaction and this ripple effect that just brings blessings that are so much bigger than we could ever think of or imagine. We talked a little bit before about how, out of Abraham's faith, God blessed the nations just for years and years and generations, and it all stemmed out of this first step. So let me ask you this question. What is your Abraham moment? There's something in your life a situation that might be tough or painful or hard or confusing, something that you might not completely understand why is happening. Because it's in these times that instead of just bottling up our emotions and getting angry and turning on God, that we need to step out in faith and turn to God. As a result of stepping out, we get to see and we get to watch God turn and use a situation to do something so much more and bless so many more people than we could ever think of or imagine.